Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life. My name is NBZ, and this is episode 45 of the show. Yeah, we're here, we're ready to talk about some more Nintendo, some more video games, some more everything. I'm joined as always by my co-host, it's Bally. Bally, how are you doing today?
I'm good. We've been playing some European exclusives.
Oh yes,
Timed exclusives.
Not many times those come around, but when they do, we've got to take advantage of it, Bally. We've got to do it. Give our gospel, should we say, to the American plebeians who have zero access right now. Yeah. Anyway, that's going to be coming up very soon. We're going to be talking about Yoshi's Woolly World, if you couldn't glean from, our subtle hints there. That is the game at the moment. Bally, what else are we going to be talking about? How about you lay out the show for us?
We've got what we've been playing, we have your emails, and for our third segment, we thought it'd be appropriate to talk a bit about Mr. Satoru Iwata, as his untimely death in terms of recording schedules meant that we had recorded the previous show, but then it came out, and now's our chance to have some positive memories of the former president.
Yes, indeed. Probably a lot of time has passed now. I think you've probably heard a lot about him on, Twitter and on podcasts and videos in general. So you've probably heard a lot. But I think that we do need to take some time to acknowledge him and all his accomplishments. So that will be happening in the final part of the show. But for now, let us jump in with stuff that we've been playing past couple of weeks. Bally, let's just talk about the Yoshi, as he likes to be known.
Meister.
The Yoshmeister. Or should we say the Yoshmeister? Because that is one of those things really annoying. By being on the internet these many years, Bally, I've been kind of indoctrinated by Americans and the way they say things. And so Yoshi is very American, and that's what they say. And so I've been kind of trained on it, and then sometimes it slips my mind. I'm like, no. Don't listen to the Americans, MBZ. Go back to your roots. Remember the Yoshi, because he is the Yoshi. And he's awesome. So how is Yoshi for you, Bally?
It was it was good. It was a solid experience, and I mean, last year I played Yoshi's Island for the first time, and it was in my top 10 games of the year. I thought it was an incredible 2D platform. I really enjoyed it, and this in almost every way basically feels like the same game but with a different art style in my mind. And that's not to say, like, if this is your first ever Yoshi game, it is by far and away the best Yoshi game. But I feel like for those of us who've played Yoshi's Island, that this game doesn't really do much more than that game did. I mean, obviously it does in terms of art style, and I'll get to that, but I don't think mechanically it feels different in any way, and it doesn't really do anything that Yoshi's Island didn't do, I would argue.
Alright, well, how about we start with that jumping off point with the visuals, because, it's the obvious thing that stands out from the get-go. This game is freaking gorgeous, to put it lightly. I think that the art style they've leveraged is a much more complicated and nuanced version of Kirby's Epic Yarn. That game was really surprising when it came out, because nothing like that had ever been released before in terms of, the visual aesthetic of it. This is kind of cut from that same cloth, to use a very punny term, but they go in much deeper with it, and the things that I really like about it are those very subtle additions where when Yoshi is walking across the floor, you'll see the little divots, the little dents underneath his feet as the fabric kind of ruffles as he moves. And, when he's pushing objects, his nose gets squished up against them. And it's those sort of tiny little aesthetic details that make the world feel so much more tactile, and so much more believable that this whole thing is made of wool. What's your perspective on the visuals then, Bally?
I definitely agree. I think my favourite sort of woolen effect, we could put it, is the water. Like, it's
Yes.
actually using pieces of blue string that are continuously moving to replicate flowing water in numerous levels. And I just think things like that are done really nicely. And there's sort of
It's done so well to the point where if you're not paying attention, then you won't even notice that that's what they're using to represent the water,
yes,
because it is done so effectively. Like, if you stand there for a second and have a look, like some stuff is falling from the ceiling, like from a waterfall, you'll notice that it's like three different strings of different colors of blue waving as kind of little what do you call them? Not glitter. I guess glitter to some degree. Just kind of little specks fall down. As if they're kind of, frothing bits of water kind of coming off the edge. And yeah, the fact that you have to kind of stand there and notice that stuff is testament to how well it's implemented.
mm. And I think you're right. The art style. Like here's the key question in your mind, MBZ. Do you think the art style carries the game?
I think it does to a certain extent. It's so nice to look at that you kind of enjoy being in that world for a long period of time. At least I did at the beginning, right? For the first three worlds, let's say, I was going completely in depth on the game. I was collecting everything. I was doing every level, looking in every nook and cranny, finding all the collectibles without using like the help token or whatever, and just kind of immersing myself in it and really enjoying the experience. But as the game goes on, I feel like it does tend to drag somewhat. I ended up playing this for 20 hours total, and a lot of that was spent in the first half of the game. By the time I got to, world 4, 5, 6, it started to be a little bit of a chore, and to that extent, the visuals weren't enough to keep me there. It almost felt like I was forcing myself to go back to the game, and that wasn't a good feeling, if I'm honest.
I've got a confession to make,
All
and
right,
I
Bali.
mean I've not finished this game, but I mean I think it's actually quite telling because I've had I've had an awful lot of time to play this game. I mean, last time we were talking about our experiences at Hyper Japan, and then I had started the game before that episode, way back when, and I've just found it so hard to keep coming back to this game and playing it. Like I don't feel that urgent need to get to the next level because I don't know, there's just nothing that's particularly hooking about this game for me. And we had this debate, and I do think it's an important factor, is that I am potentially a tad burned out on 2D platformers. And I mean, we guesstimated that I must have played about 15 to 19 2D platformers in the space of like the last year and a half or so. So I I think that my tastes in 2D platformers are now more refined, and I think I swing more to the
Yeah.
DK style of 2D platformer, which is faster paced, much heavier in general, rather than the slower, more exploration based. You've obviously got the flutter jump. I think that style of 2D platformer aged on me quite quickly. Like, I absolutely love Yoshi's Island, but I just feel like I'm not ready to enjoy another Yoshi's Island, and that's what I feel this game is. Whereas DK, it just clicks with me far more, and I could play Donkey Kong Country 2 tomorrow and have a great time. But there's just something about this that doesn't hook me in the same way other 2D platformers have, and I don't really want to say that's a fault of the game because, like I said, if you've not played Yoshi's Island, I think this is the best Yoshi game out there. But I think that for those who have played Yoshi's Island, especially someone like me who only played it last year, I don't think it's doing much different, really.
Well, I think there are a lot of new, interesting mechanics, but they aren't like they're not blowing me away. The sort of stuff that they showed off pre E3 or around E3 before the game was coming out with the curtains and the disappearing platforms. It's like, yeah, it's a neat idea, but I feel like other games have kind of done stuff like that before, and it's not really doing enough new with it to make it feel fresh. And there's a little problem I feel with the pacing, because the game is very slow and quite methodical, and especially if you're going for all the collectibles, you're going to be spending a lot of time in each level. Now, granted, it does a good job of, not falling into the Mario trap of giving you a bunch of lives and then having you lose them and then go back worlds and stuff. It's a good system. There's no lives whatsoever, and Yoshi just respawns at the last checkpoint, and that's all wonderful. But I think it's also kind of a bit to my detriment. The way I was playing it was I was very meticulously trying to collect everything, and so I was taking much longer with each level than I probably should have been, and so I kind of slowed my own pace down even more than the game was slowed down. So by the time you get through like 2 levels, you think, yeah, I've kind of played enough for the night and I can turn it in, because it was getting to the point, it was like 20 to 25 minutes a level, and there is a little bit of a daunting thing when you look at the whole world and it's like, well, okay, there are like 10 levels in this world. It's not like I can sit here and burn through one in an evening. Like when I played Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D, I would sit there every night and go through a whole world in one evening, and that was because it was so easy to click from level to level. It was really fast paced, and you always knew that you could have something fresh and quick and good to go to.
With Team DK.
Well, I think that it's a good comparison because you've already brought it up. But Yoshi isn't paced in that same way. So it's harder. Now, we have been pretty negative on it, but I still think it's a good game, and I think there are a lot of things to admire about it, especially the fact that it is far more difficult than Goodfield's previous game, Kirby's Epic Yarn, which was really, had 0 difficulty, because it was to be able to be played with younger people, and so that they wouldn't have any trouble dying, and it was just kind of a fun time. Whereas Yoshi really does challenge you. You do have to kind of go out of your way to get the harder levels. If you want to unlock the S levels, which are just some of the most challenging and interesting stuff in the game. I don't know if you've played any of them, Bally, but
No.
you have to get all of the sunshines, or the daisy flowers, whatever the hell you call them, in a world. And once you do that, you unlock the special level. And man, they do some really crazy, tough platforming, really interesting stuff. And I kind of wish more of the game had been like that. Not to that level of difficulty, but maybe striking a better balance there. I think there are 2 extremes here. There's the standard levels, which you can kind of just float through and not have to worry too much if you're not going after all the secrets. And the S levels, which, if you're going for all the secrets, then it's kind of a suicide mission, if I'm honest. Those levels are very difficult. So, yeah, it does feel like kind of 2 sides of a coin, and they never met in the middle, which is weird. So,
and I'm also being harsh because I've not finished this game, and I am interested to see what the final world does.
Well, I don't know if that's really going to make a difference, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think the final world in most 2D platformers changes anything that dramatically. So, I mean, and like you were saying with the unlockable levels, I really don't have the appetite to collect all those flowers and try and get those levels. And if I'm in the mood for playing a 2D platform and collecting some stuff to unlock some levels, I want to go back to Tropical Freeze and make sure I get those levels, because it's just a better game in my opinion. But to be honest, the levels I've enjoyed the most in Yoshi's Woolly World are the faster paced ones, the more linear ones where you don't explore as much, that are have tougher platforming elements.
So more kind of the Twitch stuff where you're like on the curtains and those things.
Yeah,
are kind
that
of
one,
automatically
and
swinging from left to right.
Yeah, a few of those have been nice. There's certain levels where they're quite puzzle based, to be honest, and I have found myself just walking around for like 10-15 minutes like, what am I doing next? And then it's like I didn't
it kills the momentum, basically.
I didn't play this game to play like Trine 2. I want to like progress. This isn't meant to be puzzle platforming, and it sometimes turns into that a bit. So like I said, I prefer the faster pacing, and there's not enough of that, at least so far, in this game.
Yeah, well, what I will say is that it lends to its benefit in co-op, because we did play a little bit of this together, a couple levels, and I think the co-op works pretty well. Like, it's the sort of slowness that allows you to not get left behind, and you can kind of figure things out, and you can basically use each other as woolen balls to figure some stuff out if you don't have enough wool at your disposal, which is like a nice kind of handicap that they add to it. But it's definitely easier to play than something like, say, New Super Mario Brothers or Donkey Kong, which is just the worst. Do not play Donkey Kong in multiplayer. It is absolutely terrible. So yeah, it was definitely much more manageable. But again, even when we were playing, we were both like, I don't really want to do another level right now, you know?
Yeah. It
sucks. It sucks because it looks so nice, you know? It has such a great aesthetic.
There's not enough that sucks you into the next level. And I don't know what, I can't even claim what did that in Yoshi's Island, but something made me want to play that game more. And like, I'd sit down for an hour.
And I don't think you can even claim that it's about it being your first Yoshi game, because I was feeling the same stuff with this, and this is my first Yoshi game, so yeah, it's a bit of a toss-up. What I will say is there's a lot of motivation for me personally to kind of go around and do those collectible things, at least for the first few worlds, because I really liked unlocking all the different versions of Yoshi, the different kind of patterns that you get if you get all the wool pieces in a single level. That had a kind of collectability mentality that to me felt like something I wanted. It didn't feel extraneous and kind of pointless collecting for the sake of collecting, because I liked, you know, the aesthetic of the game is one of the best things about it, and so giving you more varieties of Yoshi and what he looks like kind of switches things up and makes it kind of more interesting and cool to look at. And especially if you go for those S levels and get the wool versions of Yoshi in those, I highly recommend at least doing that for the first couple of worlds, because those are super cool. I'm not going to spoil it, but there are some patterns that you get which are kind of Nintendo references, and they are pretty damn amazing. So if you're going to pick up this game and play it, and I'm sure a lot of you will, and you'll have a good time with it, definitely try and go after that stuff, because I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a nice addition to the game. And hey, you can also use Amiibo to make him into different things. I had my Shulk Amiibo down while we were playing this, and we put him on, and he looked okay. I couldn't really distinguish that much. It was quite hard, but you know, you can still have some fun with that stuff. It's one of those uses for Amiibo that I'm actually kind of behind, honestly. I kind of like it. It doesn't do anything crazy, but you know, Amiibo shouldn't do something crazy. They should do something additive, and I think, you know, that stuff is.
Yeah.
So
it's a nice addition, and I think I always do this. When I come down hard in a game, I sound way too harsh, and I don't really want to leave on that, because this is a really, really good game. I just think it's not my cup of tea at this point in time. And
it might be, wrong time, wrong place, who knows, if you're burned out or what. But yeah, that's Yoshi's Woolly World. That's all you've been playing, right, Bally? Nothing else?
I have been playing Ocarina of Time, but I will talk about that next time and hopefully finish both that and Woolly World.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to that next time. For now, we'll move on to me talking a little bit about a little game on the PlayStation Vita that I played while I was down in London.
A Vita game?
Oh, sure. I tell you what, they're rare. They're very rare. But I found one in the wild. I captured it, took it home, stuffed it into my SD card slot, and away we went. So I had look, I'm violent, and I will go out and catch the haggises. So don't you worry about it. I'm pro hunter. I'll tell you what. Anyway, I'm down in London right now, and I wanted a portable game to have with me so I could play something while I was down here. I knew we'd have kind of a lot of off time, just sitting about not doing much, and we did have a week or so at my grandparents where I was just in the house kind of chilling, and I wanted a thing to play for that period of time, and so I got Danganronpa. Now, this is a game when I told Tabali, he was just silent and didn't have a clue what to say because it sounds very Japanese, and I'll tell you what, it is very Japanese. If I were to give you the elevator pitch on what Danganronpa is, it is basically a visual novel, but it's a sort of a mashup between Phoenix Wright and the Hunger Games, or I guess some people would say Battle Royale, or whatever, because Hunger Games inspired by Battle Royale, that whole thing, kids killing each other. You get it. You get the idea. And so basically, it takes place in this high school where all these kids have been invited. They're like 15. And they are all like the ultimate at something. So one of them's like the ultimate baseball player, and one of them is the ultimate fashionista, and one of them's like the ultimate gambler. And like they aren't very kind of stereotypical things that you would learn at school. So it's not like the ultimate physicist or the ultimate geographer. They're just all these weird kind of adult jobs, really, which is a little bit strange. But yeah, so they all go to the school. And they then get told by this evil teddy bear called Monokuma that, in fact, you are not going to go to school. You're basically stuck here for the rest of your lives. But if you want to get out, you have to kill one of the other students. And if you get away with it, then you are free to go, and everyone else will get murdered. So the game plays out along the structure of you basically figuring out what the hell is going on in this place, and along the lines, people will get murdered, and then it goes into the Phoenix Wright version of the gameplay, where you're kind of having this class trial and figuring stuff out, using clues and shooting down statements, and it's kind of crazy, and it's kind of amazing. Bally, are you perplexed by this?
Yeah, so there's only one winner.
Well, I don't want to spoil anything, right?
We can't.
It's quite
just
hard
leaving
to...
me hanging here. Just leaving me hanging. Okay.
But you're gonna have to play the game. You're gonna find out. I think there's an anime which is the exact same, because I was hearing Dodger on the Co-optional podcast talk about it, and she said that she watched the anime before she played the game, and apparently the anime is the exact same story beat for beat from the game. So when she played the game, she was like, this is just like a slower version of the anime. So she was like, oh no, I've already been spoiled on it, basically. So if you care about it enough, then look, I can recommend you go watch that. But it's really fantastic. It's super interesting, and it kind of speeds up a lot of the stuff that Phoenix Wright does and makes it more efficient. It being a visual novel, it is kind of less hands-on. So in Phoenix Wright, for example, you'll have a cross-examination to do, and there will be multiple statements that the person is making, and then you have to kind of think like, okay, which one do I press? Where do I particularly put my evidence up? Whereas in Danganronpa, it's much more linear, and you are always kind of pushed in the direction of what you're supposed to be doing, so it's a lot easier to figure things out, but the mystery unravels in a much more fascinating way, and it really kind of... I was so entrenched in the story and wanting to find out what happened next that I literally, for like 3 or 4 days, just played it for 5-6 hours a day and just sat there and just absorbed it all in, and it was really, really fun. A super fantastic story. The ending's great, and there is a second one on Vita, so I'm gonna have to pick that up at some point, but I would highly recommend it. Unfortunately, it's really story based, so I can't really talk that much about it outside of the premise and the setup because I don't want to spoil it for people. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's not... I mean, I hesitate to call things not video games because it's interactive and it has elements of doing things, so it's not just you clicking buttons and reading a book, essentially. You are participating in it, but it's certainly less hands-on. So if you like, a more narrative-based experience, Danganronpa, if you have a Vita, I know not many people do, but yeah, it's really fantastic. I enjoyed it a lot. Kind of getting into that trend of me just playing a lot of Japanese games and really liking them. They have a lot of cool stuff going on. So yeah.
How many are there? There's only 2.
Yeah, there's only 2 so far. Kind of funny, recently did an interview with the creator, and they're releasing a third game, which is like a spin-off title, which takes place between the first and second game. Okay. And then they also announced that they are working on the third game at the moment, which I guess we'll get some news about it later this year. But yeah, it's really interesting. So it's one of those rare franchises that has given people reason to buy a Vita because there really isn't much else on the system for you. But it really is fantastic and stood out to me. So I've been following it for a while. I always hear Colin from Kind of Funny talking about it. He talked about it back on Podcast Beyond when those guys were doing that. And I just waited for my opportune moment to strike, and it was in a sale, so I got it then, and it was certainly worthwhile. So, yeah, I recommend it to people. So yeah, that is pretty much it. That's what I have been playing, and that is pretty much going to close out this segment. But do not go anywhere. We are going to be right back with a bit more of the podcast, where we will talk about your emails and the stuff that you sent us. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. It is part 2 and that means it's time for your emails. So before we get started on those, I'll remind you of the email address, which is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We are always running out, so do send those in if you have anything to say about the podcast or a question, or you just want to say hi, that'd be nice. Yeah,
we love those emails. They're good fun.
Exactly, just say whatever you want to say and we'll look forward to hearing from those. So on to the first email, which is from Kevin. So Kevin talked a lot about some of his first experiences with Zelda, which he's been having recently. So then his question was, which style of Zelda do we prefer? 2D Zelda or 3D Zelda? And why? And he says, thanks in advance and keep up the great podcast. It's something I look forward to each 2 weeks, and I'm really glad I stuck to MBZ's channel after he quit Pokemon, because you are still producing such quality content. Keep it up.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. I think, after Pokemon, a lot of people said, peace out, I'm done. I'm out of here.
The haters.
The haters, yeah. We don't tolerate haters on this
But
channel,
the true hardcore.
Right, absolutely.
Stuck to the podcast.
The cream of the crop,
Exactly.
as they call them. So yeah, it's a hard question, the 2D versus 3D Zelda. Of course, Bally, we just played the Minish Cap, which is an excellent 2D Zelda, which I really liked. And again, that's a weird one because it feels very 3D, as we talked about, in its design. And for me, that's what it comes down to. The 3D Zeldas stand out way more for me in terms of memorability. There are moments in the 3D Zelda games that I have stuck in my brain. Dungeons in Twilight Princess, cutscenes in Skyward Sword, moments from Wind Waker. And I think it's harder to pick out those moments in the 2D games. I think in 3D games, they're much more, you're on a big screen, you have, the speakers, blaring it out, and it's kind of a much more epic in scale experience. And so for that reason, I feel more connected to those games. I feel like they're more valuable to me. And I also kind of started on the 3D Zeldas. Twilight Princess was the first 3D Zelda that I played myself and beat, although having experience with Wind Waker before with you. So I think that's what it comes down for me. I think they're very different experiences, and I also think it's interesting that they translate so well from one reality to the other, one dimension, should I say, to the other. And we talked before about how Metroid and Zelda both translate very similarly, and Mario is super different. But yeah, for me, it's 3D Zeldas. That's where it comes down.
On what you were talking about between memorizing and the memorable moments of the 3D Zeldas sticking out more in your mind, I think it's as simple as the fact that we are human beings.
Yes,
we are living in a 3D world.
Yeah,
stuff that happens in 3D spaces relates to us more and are more memorable.
Yeah,
and you're right, I completely agree that those 3D moments in the 3D Zeldas are more memorable, they're more epic.
Yes,
they are in general, because of the 3D world, are longer games. And for me, I definitely prefer the 3D Zelda. I mean, it, like you said, more memorable, more epic, and that's for me the reasons I play Zelda, is how epic those stories are, the quest, and that is absolutely nothing against the 2D Zeldas, because they are so amazing and great in their own ways. But the second I start a 2D Zelda,
I don't feel as immersed in the world. And that's a really obvious thing to say about
Yeah.
2D versus 3D. But I don't feel as immersed in the world, and I know that it's going to be a shorter game experience. And obviously, Wind Waker, such a great game, my favorite game ever, and sailing around in that game just wouldn't work in 2D. It just wouldn't work.
Well, they kind of tried with Phantom Hourglass. That's not really 2D. It's like this kind of top-down perspective from an angle, isometric, really. And it's hard to fit those into this conversation because they are straddling the line in many ways. But I think even those, I probably have more memories of, places in Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass than even Link to the Past, say. And I know it's blasphemous, like that. For people who grew up with that game, they know that inside out and know those places inside out. But again, it's trying to kind of distinguish between the two, because I think a lot of stuff in Link to the Past is reusing assets quite blatantly. Like in that era, the tile sets were kind of different, kind of used the same textures and stuff, but recolored, and so those things were they keep coming up again and again, whereas the world design and the way things are structured in a 3D Zelda is much more unique. So you feel that each dungeon is kind of standing out in its own right, whereas in Link to the Past there are many which kind of blend together and have a very similar feel and look and, design to them in some senses. So
yeah. And I mean, Link Between Worlds was just an incredible 2D Zelda.
But even then, can you pick out multiple dungeons in your head that you really remember?
No,
that fondly?
absolutely not. And as much as it was an enjoyable experience overall, you're exactly right. There are elements of that game that just aren't as memorable as a game like Wind Waker, which is easily my most memorable Zelda through multiple playthrough.
Do you think that is more to do with nostalgia as well? Do you think had you grown up with Link to the Past and had that as your first Zelda, would it be different?
Really hard to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to say no, because I think that a lot of people who grew up with Link to the Past and really enjoyed that game still memorize Ocarina of Time more.
Maybe, yeah.
And I would make the argument that Ocarina of Time is standing the test of time, when it comes to being memorable, and I think for a lot of the reasons that we've already said about the 3D versus 2D.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, things like even the names of bosses and which boss relates to which dungeon, Ocarina is ingrained into my psyche, unlike many other games. So yeah, very true. That's a big one.
So I mean, huge question, but I hope we answered that just about. But anyway, the next email is from Jacob. Hey Ms. Ed and Bally, Splatoon is creative, colourful, and just straight up one of the most fun games I've played in a long time. I love the way Nintendo took a genre that had become so formulaic and turned it on its head. This got me wondering, are there any other untouched genres that you'd like to see Nintendo try their hand at? Personally, I would love to see their take on a 4X game, a Civilization-esque game in the Fire Emblem universe where you're creating kingdoms and lineages would be something I would absolutely want to see happen in the future. And that's Jacob from Los Fresnos, I hope I pronounced that right, in Texas, the United States.
Yeah, indeed. Bally, we should probably talk about 4X and what that means, because probably a lot of our audience has no idea what Jacob is going on about. You, Bally, have played some board games that are 4X.
Yeah, so I actually didn't really fully realise that 4X also applied to video games, because I had only heard it through sort of board games and board game podcasts, and it means, and I had to look this up, explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. And it's basically this idea, it can be multiple genres. It can be space or fantasy. It's often one of those two.
Yeah.
And it's like those X's describe. It's about expanding an empire, destroying others, and building resources using your newfound empire.
And I think most people would have the context of something like Civilization for that, where it is all about that kind of city expansion and kind of taking over a space and, then growing with it. And
I think it's a fantastic idea for that Fire Emblem universe.
Yeah.
I think that would be awesome. So, I mean, if you hadn't said that, I might have even have said something quite similar, because I think that's something a lot of fans would love to see. And I mean, it's a very complicated genre, I would want to.
Yeah. Oh, it is deep. You have to go very, very kind of hardcore with that stuff.
As much as Nintendo love a variety in their games, they don't often do, you know, deep, I would argue.
Yes, it's that they always have games which are simple to master and understand, and sometimes have that kind of much deeper layer of complexity like Pokemon, but oftentimes, they're very accessible, but maybe not have quite as deep a layer as a 4X game does. So,
on to the crucial question.
Yeah.
What should they try next, MZ?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested, not necessarily that this would be a good idea for Nintendo to do, but I've always been interested in how Nintendo would approach an MMO style game. And recently, you know, I haven't really talked about this on the podcast, but I've been playing an MMO myself. I've been playing Terra Online with Nagi, friend of the show, and you know, it's one of those genres which has kind of died out over the years. It used to be very, very popular, and now you very much struggle to find your footing in that space. Really, World of Warcraft is the only one which is hugely successful. There are others like EVE Online, which is pretty good, but Terra is like this kind of weird out there game, and I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun with it, but I'd really like to see what Nintendo could do in that space. And a lot of people shout from the rooftops, do Pokemon, like, because that makes the most obvious sense. It's like you're a trainer in the world, you go around, you fight other people in real time. And yeah, that would be cool, but I feel like it kind of goes against the spirit of Pokemon in some ways.
What about expanding this newfound universe of Splatoon in Copolis?
Oh boy, yeah. Well, see, what I was thinking is more along the Nintendo Land route, where you just take all their franchises and, in the Smash Brothers way, mash them all up and kind of have a Nintendo world, as it were, in kind of this MMO genre. And I don't know how it would play or what you would do, but you look at what Nintendo have done with Splatoon and how they've completely taken the shooter genre and just done a crazy thing with it. I'm just really fascinated by how they would approach that kind of game. Because it is one of the things they've never done before. And I also think that moving forward into their mobile initiative and NX and the potential of that having a handheld and console component, you know, you could play in this world on all those devices and just have that consistent experience across all of them, which I think, you know, that would work really nicely with their future.
I mean, I was going to say the obvious MMO,
yes.
But I'd like to see something that's open world, but isn't based in this sort of fantasy idea that obviously Zelda Wii U or Zelda NX, as we should entitle it from now on, is perhaps going to look like. So, and when I say something new that's open world, stick Mario in an open world. Create an expansive universe of platforming. Hide the stars under cliff tops and things like that, and see where you can explore with Mario in a platforming universe.
Right, we talked earlier this year, I played Gone Home. Sorry, not Gone Home, which is a completely different game. Grow Home. Lots of indie games using the Home moniker, I guess. Grow Home, which is really a shake-up of the platforming genre and taking it in a very different direction. And I do think, like, they were talking about this on the Giant Bombcast, and Jeff Gersman was saying, you know, they need to do something different with Mario, and, you know, I don't know what that is, because if I knew, I'd be working on that game, but taking a platformer and doing something different with it and applying an open world model to a platformer is something I just don't think anyone has done. Actually, this year E3 they announced the next kind of Mirror's Edge game, which I can't remember what the actual title is, but
Mirror's Edge 2?
No, it's not Mirror's Edge 2, funnily enough. You'd think that would be the obvious case, but it's something else, some other subtitle. But they're saying that is going to be an open world that you can run about and explore. It's very different in that case because it's all first person platforming, which is, you know, it has its problems, and they've kind of figured those out in some games over the years, but from a third-person perspective, we've certainly not really seen anything like that in an open world, so...
Or, you know, Metroid Prime, break down the room structure, make that more open.
Yeah.
Controversial, I know,
Maybe.
But I don't know. Or, you know, there's this really strange genre that Nintendo just sort of ditched in a hole called the racing genre.
Oh, yeah, I heard of that one.
Screw your Mario Kart. We're not talking about Mario Kart.
The hardcore.
We want the wave race. We want the F-Zero. Like,
yes.
You know, that's a really great genre that Nintendo seemed like it's now sort of foreign land to explore into at the moment, and although it's not a new genre, I'd love to see them go back there.
Yeah. Very good one. Captain Falcon's crazy beat 'em up thing. A lot of people have kind of, I guess, petitioned in some ways, being like, "Yeah,
petitions. They just solve the world.
They solve the world." Yeah, I know that all petitions always result in great
peace
circumstances.
and harmony.
Yes, absolutely. But loads of places on forums and stuff always talk about, hey, Nintendo, fucking do something with Captain Falcon. He's like one of your most recognizable characters. He's a Smash Brothers favorite. F-Zero is kind of dead in the water right now. Take that character, do something different with him. And some kind of brawling game with him is often talked about. So, I don't know, something like that could be cool.
I mean, no one was expecting Splatoon, and it is now like in the running for my game of the year.
Yeah.
And I just would love Nintendo to replicate that at some point.
Absolutely.
And maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but in the coming years, yes. I'd love them to replicate that because they are really good at it. And they've got a really young team working on Splatoon, like we said before. Yeah. And it's just crazy, awesome ideas that are coming out of some of the best developers in gaming. And that's what we love the most about Nintendo.
Yes, indeed.
So anyway, on to our final email for the episode. Dear MBZ and Bally, it's Chris from Florida again. I feel bad since I have had these questions in my head for a while now, but I never had the chance to send them in. Sorry about that. I'm going to uni soon and I'm wondering what console I should bring, my Wii U or PS3. I'm pretty sure Bally would automatically say Wii U, so I guess this leans towards your opinion, NBZ. Would I though? I don't know, we'll see. Speaking of which, I just finished Assassin's Creed 3 for my PS3 and I know that Bally thoroughly enjoyed Assassin's Creed 4 for Wii U. I recently ran out of space on my PS3 and I was wondering what you think about Black Flag for Wii U instead. I have a small collection on my Wii U at the moment, but I'm afraid the different controls will really put me off. What would you do, Bally, if you were more used to the PS3 controls? And for MBZ, I've been a Fire Emblem fan for a long time. Ever since my friend introduced me to Radiant Dawn, I've fallen in love. Needless to say, I'm super excited for Fire Emblem Fates, even though I didn't like Awakening that much. What do you think about the new features that are coming in Fire Emblem Fates, such as the tweaks to the pair-up systems, infinite weapon durability with the special added effects, new classes, and the recently announced My Castle? I was a little wary at first, but Intelligent Systems has continued to prove me wrong by how much they can still keep the game strategic even though they're taking out one of the series' staple mechanics. Thanks again and keep doing what you're doing.
Alright, Chris, thanks for the email. Quite a few questions to dig into there.
I guess I would obviously say Wii U.
Yes,
I mean,
you would, of course
PS3 versus Wii U. I would even argue you might say Wii U over PS3 and then what do you say?
Well, no, it depends on Chris, really. It depends on what he owns and what he's played on each system. I mean, like, going to uni, how much games did you play when you were at uni? Like, how much time did you have for that stuff, basically? Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of it, I would argue, it would, because you're in that sort of dome style environment, the single player experience I found more lacking, and it was a case of Smash Brothers, Mario Kart, Mario Party,
right?
Even a bit of Call of Duty, that kind of thing. It was more multiplayer experience. So I mean, I'll be going to argue which has the better multiplayer experiences, Wii U or PS3. I don't know. If you have Nintendo Land, that is probably one of the best local multiplayer experiences that I've ever experienced.
Right. Well, I was going to say that certainly if you're going, to university for the first time and you're going to be in a dorm environment, the Wii U makes the most sense for that setting because of its focus on local multiplayer. Of course, if you want to keep doing stuff in your own time, then the PS3 certainly has a probably more broad library, and it's obviously cheaper to get those games now, and you have much more to play. And he's mentioning Assassin's Creed, which maybe shows some of his interest into the third-party scene, and of course Wii U is very limited there. So you have the Batman, and you have Arkham Knight, and not at Night. You have freaking
Black
too many
Dark
of these
Knight
games.
Returns, Joker Special, Revenge.
Yes. Yeah, too many names, too many Knights, too many Arkhams.
Yeah.
I mean, there are two of those.
If you have run out of space on your PS3, I was going to ask you, MEZ, would the Wii U version of Black Flag be a better or worse frame rate than the PS3, or roughly the same?
I'd say they're roughly the same. You know, the Wii U and PS3 are pretty on par on a power level. So I think it doesn't really matter what version you play. He's asking about like the difference in controls, right?
Yeah.
So switching from one platform to the other.
I would argue they are very similar.
Yeah.
I mean,
especially if you're using the Pro controller, right?
Yeah. I mean, I use the Pro controller. I mean, a lot of people have said it's just a copy of the Xbox 360 controller, and I completely agree.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, your friend Shaq was over last night, and he was kind of confounded by the fact that your Wii U Pro was sitting over there, and he's like, "Wait a second, is that a Bally? Why do you have an Xbox controller?" And you're like, "No, that's the
exactly." So I mean,
for Wii U.
I think in terms of that, handling wise, I would argue they will feel the same. And if you don't have space on your PS3 and you have space on Wii U, go for Wii U. It'll be a great experience, but in all seriousness, they will feel pretty much the same on both. So anyway, that's Assassin's Creed, MBZ, Fire Emblem Fates. What do you think?
I'm very interested in where it's going. You know, the impressions that I've heard so far seem to be extremely positive about, you know, the fact that they have split it into two versions, but the amount of content that is there is equal to the whole of Awakening twice over, and 3 times over if you count the DLC campaign. When it comes to the changes and what they've done to kind of mix the formula up, I welcome it with open arms, honestly. I think many of Nintendo's franchises are guilty of falling into a trap where they just become stagnant and repeat the same things again and again and never really change. I think the most obvious examples are Animal Crossing and Pokemon, where those will sell forever and ever, no matter what
Mario
they do.
Until Mario Maker.
Yes, 2D Mario certainly fell into that trap. And these aren't the biggest changes, but something like taking the idea of weapon durability and removing it completely is kind of more like an easier way to kind of get people into the series, because it's one of those things where it's the sort of mechanic that it's like kind of unnecessary in some senses. Like, yeah, this is kind of here for realism, right? Because eventually your sword will break down and you'll have to get a new one. But Fire Emblem isn't very realistic in other aspects. There are dragons and fairies and weird, you know, fantasy elements. So in many senses, it's like, why is that even there in the first place?
Are you worried that, I mean, I've only played Fire Emblem 7, but yes. I mean, there are certain weapons, like, for example, the rapier,
yes.
which are incredibly powerful.
Uh-huh.
And sort of the big thing that negates that power is that they have fewer uses.
Right.
How's that going to work, in your opinion?
Well, I think they've talked about rebalancing stuff. So instead of having, you know, crazy powerful weapons dropping consistently or being able to buy them all the time, maybe one weapon that has certain abilities will drop. And it's up to you then to decide, which character do I give it to? Do I give it to this weak character who would benefit from it? Do I give it to this crazy powerful character who can then become like a one-man army? And then it comes down to more distribution. So instead of every map, like sometimes enemies dropping weapons all the time, you might get to the end and say, find a treasure chest and get this one weapon. And then you have to kind of decide who gets it and where do you distribute it to. So instead of, you know, the inventory being chocked up with like, here's 2 iron swords, a steel sword, and a bow, say, you know, a ranger or whatever on horseback. Instead, you'd have like 1 sword and 1 bow, but they'd each have their own function and, you know, be individual in that way. And obviously, I'm not even sure if this is the case, because people in Japan already own this game, so a lot of people may be playing it right now, the kind of Japanese version. So I don't even know if that is the case. It's a bit of an older email, so I'm not sure if the weapon durability thing was confirmed or not. But even if it isn't, I think it's just an interesting shake-up.
And I mean, throughout all the E3 coverage, a lot went over my head. But
yes.
What is my castle?
Well, but I don't really know, honestly. It seems like kind of a hub area where you just go and hang out, and I think you can set up your army there for like online battles. It's like
okay.
Fire Emblem kind of Wi-Fi battles.
Should also mention, I think we mentioned this on the other podcast,
yeah.
that I've actually downloaded Fire Emblem Awakening.
You have.
So I mean, I plan to play that game before Fire Emblem Fates comes out, which I am really looking forward to.
You should be.
I mean, I'm playing Ocarina of Time 3D right now on the 3DS, but I mean, that is the next game for the handheld for me, so I am super pumped about that one.
Yeah, it'll be a good introduction. It'll introduce you to the power up mechanics and kind of get you used to the aesthetic because it's different from the GBA games. But Fire Emblem Awakening is an incredible experience, really. So yeah, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that when you eventually play it and we get around to them. So yeah.
Well, I think that's all the emails for this episode.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But once again, if you do have anything you would like to send in to us, and we love reading all your emails, it is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com.
Yes, indeed. So we will be back after this quick break with some thoughts on the late and great Mr. Satoru Iwata. So do not go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Danganronpa.
Alright everyone, welcome back to the final part of the show. And this week we are going to be discussing the life and times of Mr. Satoru Iwata, who very tragically passed away a couple of weeks ago. The timing couldn't really have been worse for us, honestly, because we just finished recording our podcast and then this happened, and it was a tough couple of days, I'll tell you, Bally. I was really shocked when I learned the news about Iwata's passing. It was in the evening, and I was just about to go to sleep, and then I checked Twitter for one last time, and I saw this news, and I don't even know how I got to sleep that night, because, man, my mind was all a-frazzle.
Luckily, I had gone to sleep because I was kind of getting into a pattern of going to bed a bit earlier, and then I just woke up. First thing I always do is check Twitter, check the news, check the internet, and I actually got a text from my friend Alex who just said the words Iwata with a sad face, and I'm like, what? Like what's going on? So I immediately checked online, and I was just like stunned. I think we all knew that there were obviously health issues and everything wasn't right, and he obviously didn't come to E3. But I don't think anyone, especially sort of at our level, thought that there was immediate life-threatening circumstances.
No, from all indications, he seemed to be getting better, and I think there are a few people who were close to him, like Junichi Matsuda, who's the kind of guy behind Pokemon, who said that he'd recently spoken to Iwata like a couple of days before, and said that he had been perfectly healthy and thought that he was looking good. So it may have been a complete shock for even people over in Japan. I'm not sure how much they knew, and I'm not sure we'll ever get to find that stuff out, but really, yeah, we knew he was ill last year, and we knew he'd kind of recovered, but it was really just out of the blue, and I think it's all the more shocking because as an industry, video games are still very young, and so we haven't really lost many kind of visionaries and legends and really important people yet, and this is really the first big one who has really made such an impact. So I think that has a lot to do with people's reactions as well. It's not necessarily just that it's Iwata, it's the fact that he represents this kind of idea that the industry is kind of moving to that point where, yes, people who started are getting old and probably going to start passing away soon, which is kind of frightening to think about. But
and he was just in the public spotlight so much more than many chief executives and former developers and things like that. And I mean we'll get into it, but with the directs and Iwata asks, but I mean he was a guy Nintendo fans knew a lot about and knew sort of what he was in favor of, what he was pushing, and the directs were just that embodied.
Yeah, absolutely. He was really personable, and I think that's why a lot of people connected with him. And people say, he's a CEO of this giant corporation, and yet he is one of the most kind of light-hearted and happy and smiling and kind of personable people in that space, which is why I think everyone was so disheartened by this news. But let's not dwell on the sadness. I think it's a good idea to kind of celebrate Iwata and talk about his accomplishments and the amazing things he did. So let's start at the top, Bally. When did you first become aware of Iwata? Was I mean, obviously the direction stuff pushed him more into the spotlight in recent years, but we have been following Nintendo for a while, and so we knew that he was around. Do you recall the first time?
I would say it must be either around 2003, 04, 05, in that window, and I would want to say it was watching an E3 conference, probably on sort of GameSpot at the time, and sort of live streaming and watching videos online was really new.
You probably just watched a video after the fact, as opposed, because live streaming probably didn't start until like 06, 07 at least. So.
And I remember it's stuff like end of the GameCube days, launching the DS. Those things were kind of my first memories of him. And I think I might have been with you. I can't remember. We definitely watched a lot of E3s together. But I'd say that sort of time period.
Yeah. And did you kind of at the time realize like this is the guy who's at the head of the company? Did that impact you in any way?
I don't think so. I just thought this was Nintendo's a Japanese company. Here's a Japanese guy telling me about their company, and it didn't really hit me that he might have been a previous developer, or that he was the chief executive, or that any of those sort of things. He was just a guy telling me about some games, and when I was that age, that's all I really wanted. And
exactly.
It was quite simple then.
No, it was the same for me, really. I think probably through magazines and stuff, seeing his image more than him in video form. I think the one thing that stands out most to me is probably him holding the box for the Wii up above his head. I think that's probably a moment where I knew who this guy was previously, but now I'm more kind of informed on Nintendo a bit and kind of know that he's kind of the head of the company, and he is now revealing this new era going forward for Nintendo. And that image is so emblazoned in my head of that black box being held atop. And I remember at the time, obviously, people were saying it's 3 DVD boxes in size. So I remember going to my cupboard, getting out 3 DVDs and holding them, being like, oh man, this is what this is going to be, the actual thing when I get it, is this size. And we always obsess over the boxes at that point. At this point in time, it's like no one really cares what the box looks like. But it was a big point of interest back then. And that image is a famous one, and rightly so, because it's kind of marking the beginning of the era where Iwata kind of revolutionized, for want of a better word, the games industry with the Wii and with the DS.
Probably, arguably, sort of Nintendo's most successful era.
Yes,
in terms of
absolutely.
Money made, sales of the system, the Wii and the DS under Iwata's leadership were just absolute humongous successes, and he was not sort of above and beyond all the goings on, because one anecdote that's been floating around is how involved he was in actually arranging and getting involved and making sure that brain training happened, and speaking with Dr. Kawashima, getting him saying, hey, I really like your sort of maths ideas, like what do you think that how could they work in a game? And he actually went to him and they discussed and planned out how it would work and put together brain training, which then went on to 19 million copies, I think, worldwide, which was just amazing in sort of 2006, I want to say, about that time.
05, 06 probably. And I think the meeting with Dr. Kawashima was actually the day the DS launched in Japan.
Wow.
Iwata was over there discussing this project, and it ended up being kind of the thing which propelled that system to the kind of astronomical heights that it reached in terms of sales numbers. That was a...
Another anecdote that I've really admired, and I can't remember what year this was, but at some point Nintendo was doing, they took a tanking, and in response Iwata took a 50% pay cut.
Yes,
Can you remember what year that was?
I believe it was the 3DS Ambassador
3DS?
Year program. Yeah.
So I mean, we're sort of in a society now where due to capitalism, whether a company is failing or doing well, the CEO's salary is something that's, non-negotiable. It's not really something that is often paraded about as, if the company is struggling, it's normally layoffs. It's not let's cut the CEO's pay. And obviously, in terms of real numbers, cutting the CEO's pay is not going to really help the company at all.
No.
But in terms of symbolism, I just think that's incredible. Like, for a company of Nintendo's size, for their president and CEO to cut his salary when the company is failing and saying, you know what, like, it's wrong for me to just earn this amount of money when the 3DS's launch has been such a failure, and I want to be part of this turnaround, and to represent that, I'm gonna cut my salary. And I just think that's such a great precedent that you just don't see very often.
Yeah, and it's also kind of related to the way that he felt about his employees and about how, not doing layoffs was the right thing to do, because in his mind, if he had laid people off, then the people who were still at the company would always have in the back of their mind, the potential of their insecurity in their job, and so they wouldn't be working at their hardest, they wouldn't be putting their all into the products and into the software that they were making. And so to keep morale and to keep people, working at their best, he decided, it's best for, the higher executives to take pay cuts as opposed to laying off, the people doing a lot of the work in the company, and it's extremely admirable, especially at a company of that size, as you said, for him to do that. So yeah, lot of amazing things that Iwata did. Let's talk about some of his other accomplishments. Obviously the Wii and DS were kind of shepherded under his watch, but he was a programmer. He was, in the development field before he became president or even general manager at Nintendo. And some amazing things that he did include a lot of work with the kind of the Pokemon franchise. One thing which is extremely important, I think, for both of us as young kids was Pokemon Gold and Silver being the size that it was and having the scope that it did to include Kanto as a second region to go back to and kind of see how it changed over time was a thing that Iwata was able to accomplish because of his ability to compress the size of the world down onto a Game Boy cartridge. I heard that the Game Boy cartridge was about 1 megabyte of data, which you think about now, 1 megabyte is absolutely minuscule. Kind of blows my mind that you could fit a whole game into 1 megabyte of data, but they did back then. And he compressed it to such a degree that they fit into the entire second region, which is like, that part of that game is probably why so many people love it so much.
It is really improved, like, the scope and scale.
Yeah, it was essentially, you beat the game and then there's this whole second half, and for people who had played the first game, it was like this nostalgia trip, though it had only been a few years.
Our first ever experience of nostalgia.
Yeah, and kids grow up very quickly, so a period of 3 to 4 years from the age of 6 to the age of 10 is pretty significant, right? So even back then, having that ability to go back and be like, Cinnabar Island is all burnt down and the gym is in this other place, and there is this sense of change and place and kind of time that has passed, and that was all accomplished because of Iwata's ability to compress the size down, his technical know-how, which is kind of stunning, honestly. So that's a big one.
And I mean, some of his other games where it was all related with HAL, wasn't it? So it's the Kirby, and I mean, HAL. It started off with just like 6 people, including him, I think.
Yeah, it was a group of friends, I believe, from just some technical shop that they hung out at, and then they kind of formed the company from there. Which eventually led to his job at Nintendo and becoming part of the company. But he also, once he was general manager, he went back for Super Smash Bros. Melee to help with the debugging process there. So he'd been out of the development kind of underground, I guess, and then he just jumps right back in, gets his hands dirty, and starts debugging Smash Melee before it was going to launch in Japan, which is kind of crazy. You don't think about that these days. These people who have been promoted to a higher station and then they just go back into the roots of where they came from. Kind of astonishing, honestly. So,
but I mean, I think we should come to sort of, his role as CEO of Nintendo, and more recently how much of a relationship the fan base has built up with him through those directs. Because,
Yes.
I mean, as much as we knew of him before those directs and things like that, we wouldn't see him outside of E3 too often. And the idea that there were these, hopefully still are, these videos that allow us to link with Nintendo and find out what's going on, what's coming out. And obviously it's self-promotion, but I mean, that's what we're here for. We want to see some games. So I mean,
Right.
just that constant link with the company and with him was just so great to see and so unusual. Like,
And I think the thing I love about Iwata is that he doesn't feel like a PR mouthpiece in the same way that Reggie or some other, folks do in the games industry. Like, I love Reggie, he's a great guy, and of course, he's been made into this character, and, Iwata himself was a character, but Reggie does tend to toe the line when it comes to that, being a PR person. He's clearly not as much of a games enthusiast as someone like Iwata was, and so when it came to the Nintendo Direct,
Smash Brothers skills.
yes, as we found out at E3, but Iwata was an enthusiast, and he was someone who loved what he did, and he loved the business he was in, and he wasn't in it for a business sense. He wasn't like Reggie who'd just come from Pizza Hut and was looking for his next big venture. He was in it for the games, to not put it any other better way. And that came across in his presentation and the way that he carried himself and the way he talked to the audience and the goofy, silly stuff that they would do in those Nintendo Directs, making their executives characters, making them stand out. And, those are some of my favorite moments that Nintendo have done in recent years, because they have had struggles when it comes to selling hardware, and the company is not doing so well financially, but all the while they keep this positive outlook, and they're always kind of looking for goofy and interesting ways to present their stuff, and I just really like the way that they've carried themselves.
It is that idea of the head of this company presenting their vision to you.
Yes.
And there's something so exciting about this, and this was brought up on other podcasts, but Walt Disney, right before the theme parks even started, he had some television space in order to present his ideas to America. And he would actually, Walt Disney would come in front of the camera and speak about Disneyland and then what became Disney World later, and he actually had models in front of him that he would talk about and say, this is my vision for the future, this is what I want to do. And I mean, that was Disney way back then, and now Disney keep their executives well hidden behind their family appearance. But to see Nintendo, which is obviously another family orientated company, to put their CEOs as their mouthpieces right at the front of the company, on the battle lines, you might say, is really interesting. And it's like they must be the only company that are doing that, especially in the gaming industry at this point in time.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, you have,
in terms of big companies, I don't think any of the other big ones do.
That's true, but I think the difference is that the big companies have gaming as a secondary or tertiary division, right? So Microsoft obviously it has someone right at the top, but he's not involved directly in games, and the same goes for Sony. They have their own kind of heads of that industry, and so in a sense you are right there, but the other companies do parade out the people who are the heads of the gaming divisions. But yeah, on Nintendo's scale, of course, gaming is the thing they do, so their CEO is the one who does everything. But yeah, it's definitely unique. It's the sort of thing where Nintendo are leading by example in many ways in the internet space, and then they're so behind in these other aspects. Their presentations at E3 and their Nintendo Directs are so kind of ahead of the game, and the things that they did with Treehouse last year and this year, everyone else started trying to copy it and try and do their own live streams and everything. And then you talk about like online and all that other stuff they're trying to do, and they're behind a little bit. But, for what it's worth, they still are leading in the game space, and Iwata's Nintendo Directs had a lot to do with that. And I'm not sure if he's the one who spearheaded that or not, but I certainly think that it was, it's one of the best ideas they've had in years, quite honestly. So
I think the Directs and a lot of what he's done is, changed the company for good, for permanent. Like these are permanent changes that you can't see Nintendo trying to go back from, and we're hearing a lot of rumors about what's coming next and how you're going to re-engage again with that sort of DS and Wii audience that was obviously so successful. And I feel like those were real, core values of Iwata. And what he stood for and what he made the company stand for. And as much as a lot of those casual games haven't maybe aged in the best way possible, they were successful and they made non-gamers gamers, and that was really exciting.
Indeed. A lot of great moments from his tenure. In terms of the Iwata Asks Bally, these came out quite often, and I never went and read them all the time. A lot of the time there would be a NeoGAF thread that kind of had the Cliff Notes version of it, where they would pick out the most important stuff. How many of these did you read? Did you go back in the archive and have a look?
Oh, no, I'm afraid I am quite unknowledgeable about the Iwata Asks. I have read a few, but I can't even remember which ones they were. I seem to... You'd linked to me a few a long time ago that I did read, but I can't remember what they were about.
Yeah, I mean, these have been around for a very long time, and I think the fascinating thing about it is because Iwata was a developer and a gamer before he became president, he has such a knowledge of how everything works, and so he can just ask these really incisive, interesting questions that kind of get the developers to talk and bring something out in them that I don't think many kind of journalistic interviews are able to do. Of course, Iwata has this access, this unprecedented access, because he's the head of the company, to go to these people. He's also their boss, so they're kind of inclined to answer to him, right? But some of the answers that he gets back, and there's conversation that he had with Fire Emblem Awakening about why the characters had no feet, and that led into this really interesting tangent, and those are the sort of things that you don't get from anywhere else, and it's just really another thing of how they're kind of opening themselves up to their audience and not kind of hiding away, and kind of showing behind the curtain, something that I really appreciate. And I don't think that mantle is going to be taken up anytime soon. It seems like they've kind of, respectfully said, they put a banner up at the top of the Iwata Asks page saying this is going to kind of remain here in memory of Iwata. But yeah, it's kind of sad that that's going to go away, because there was so much amazing stuff that came out of it. And I think a lot of the anecdotes coming out of the Iwata Asks was that very often the line "Iwata laughs" or "everyone laughs" was used, because they were just having such a fun time discussing these games, and he was the sort of guy who would just kind of laugh along consistently at all the kind of stuff that was happening.
Injection of fun into it all that is just so refreshing. And I mean, that GDC speech, what I remembered the most was he was trying to describe Nintendo's ethos, and he said, look at these two golf games, and he brings up Mario Golf and Tiger Woods on the screen, and this is 2004?
2005.
So he's brought up Mario Golf on, I presume it was the GameCube, and Tiger Woods on whatever system.
I guess it was still on the GameCube at that point when they had third-party support.
I guess it was a long time ago. And he was saying, now, as graphics improve, obviously, Tiger Woods is going to look more and more realistic, and etc. Photorealism, that's the argument. And he's saying, but I don't believe that games even need that, because if you look at Mario Golf, it looks amazing because of the art style. And he was laying out this argument between art style and photorealism, basically saying you don't need photorealism, art style is the way to go, because in order for you to have fun, to experience the game, it's not important. And I completely agree with that sentiment, and the number of games that we have talked about where the art style is king. I mean, we've just been playing Yoshi's Woolly World. Art style is definitely king in that
Absolutely.
game. It just looks incredible. Since 2005, that photorealism has really stepped up a lot of gears, and even though it has, the argument in favor of art style and what a good-looking art style in a game like Mario Golf can do just speaks volumes.
Yeah, I think it was more his argument that the industry was moving to a place where everything was becoming homogenized and looking the same,
Absolutely.
And he wanted to be like, you know what? There are these two games that are essentially kind of the same, but they couldn't look any more different. And that was kind of the approach that he wanted from the industry, is to try and kind of stand out a bit more as opposed to funneling down this tunnel.
And look at how many photorealistic games we now have.
Yeah.
It's just mad.
Yeah, that's how it went. But yeah, I think we've talked quite a lot about Iwata and some of the great things he did. But what are your personal favourite memories of Iwata, Bally? What stands out to you personally?
My favourite memories. I'm trying to remember back to the very first Direct.
I think it's interesting because the first Direct for America, anyway, Reggie was the one presenting. I don't think it was until a couple of Directs in where Iwata ended up doing it for everyone as global president. So,
I think the memory of how Nintendo became self-aware of the memes Iwata was creating.
Right.
And I know that definitely wasn't intended at the start, but then it sort of snowballed into now, directly to you with the arms and that kind of thing. And I love the character that has brought out in the company, and that will definitely just remain as like a thing that's going to go on into the future. And it's just so refreshing that a company as big as Nintendo can take a step back and laugh at themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. All the stuff with the bananas and with the directly to you, and even stuff with the Year of Luigi with those weird Luigis popping up, like hundreds of them on the screen, and Miyamoto with the vacuum. All that stuff is so wonderful, and even this year with the puppets, that creative side of Nintendo is brought out in the directs, not only in their games. So I appreciate that as well. I think for me, I really like some of those classic on-stage moments with Iwata, and kind of the cheesiness originally of that 2005 E3 where he's kind of trying to copy Reggie from last year, but there's this kind of sincerity to Iwata. He doesn't have the same hard edge.
What?
Yeah, exactly. He's kind of, much more charming with it, as opposed to Reggie's kind of, American edge. And I love that stuff. And they had this tradition of pulling something out of their pocket, and Reggie did it with the Game Boy Micro that year. But I do remember one time when it was in 2010, I believe, and I had just come home, and this was kind of me finishing up school, and I wasn't as keyed into what was happening around E3 at that time, so I kind of realized in the afternoon, oh man, Nintendo's E3 thing is happening, and I switch on my laptop and I get on there, and I'd missed the first half, but the second half was starting, and the first thing I see is Iwata walking on stage, and this platform raises from the ground, and it's the 3DS, and he picks it up and he opens it and he says, "This is Nintendo 3DS." And just that image of him with this new piece of hardware, the future of Nintendo going forward, this commanding kind of stature he has on stage, and yet the charm that he had with him is something that kind of encapsulates Iwata for me. So yeah, he was a great man. He will be sorely missed, and I'm really not sure where Nintendo go from here. We will have plenty of time in the future to discuss that. I think for now we can kind of just remember him and see where things go. But yeah, any last thoughts here, Bally, on Iwata?
Just that it's been so nice to see how the internet and the community has come together since this happened, and the amount of artwork and amazing messages that people have been saying and have been going all over Twitter and things like that has been really incredible. And
yeah,
there's few times when the gaming community comes together in the way I've seen it do these past 2 weeks.
Yeah,
it's been
absolutely.
Really nice to see.
Yeah, he's a man respected by everyone, and that is it's a rare thing. It's a very rare thing indeed. But yeah, that is pretty much going to close out our show. So thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and we will be, consistently coming back to talk more about Nintendo. every couple of weeks. As always, you can find us and what we're doing in the meantime on the internet. So go to Twitter and follow us. I am at Lordnbz, and we have a Twitter podcast, which is at TNL Podcast, so you can follow that as well. What about you, Bally? Where can people find you?
I am at Ballyman91, BALLYMAN91, and that is also my name on the Miiverse.
I thought you were going to say something else after that. No, it's fine. I'll just pick up from there. You can also find us on iTunes. We are there, every 2 weeks. You can subscribe, and it will download straight to your listening device of choice. We're on YouTube, of course, as always, and on Stitcher, which is a wonderful app for people who hate Apple really horribly. And I know there are a lot of you out there, so big ups to the Apple haters. We obviously we did our backlog club last time, and that was a really good success. So thank you everyone for coming along on that ride with us. We really enjoyed doing it, and we will be definitely doing some more of those in the future. So if you have any ideas that you potentially want to throw at us for backlog club, you can throw it at our Twitter account, again at TNL Podcast, or you can send them to our email address. What's that, Bally?
The email address is thisnintendolife@gmail.com.
Yes, indeed. We need more mail, more questions, more everything. So send all your stuff to that email, and we will receive it, and we'll look over it. So thank you again for listening. We will be back, as I said, in a couple of weeks' time. Until then, goodbye.